At the beginning of the 20th century, Korea was an independent country governing itself under the leadership of its own emperor. Self-rule ended in 1910 when Japan forced Korea to sign a treaty whereby Japan gained all rights of sovereignty over the whole of Korea. From 1910 until the end of World War II in 1945, Japan occupied and ruled Korea, settling hundreds of thousands of Japanese on Korean land, destroying records of Korean history, and forcing Japanese language, education, and religion on the Korean people. When Japan surrendered to the Allies on September 2, 1945, Japan agreed to withdraw from Korea, marking the end of Japanese rule. U.S. and Soviet Union combat troops went into Korea in September 1945 to fill the vacuum created by Japan's withdrawal and provide stability while Korea prepared for independence. Cooperating as allies, the United States and the Soviet Union agreed that the 38th degree of latitude north, the so-called 38th parallel, would be the temporary boundary between the Soviet and American zones of occupation. Korea's move to independence was disrupted by the outbreak of the Cold War in 1946. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union became enemies instead of allies. The Soviet Union was determined to spread communism throughout the world. The United States was equally determined to oppose the spread of communism and instead support the spread of democracy. In line with their respective Cold War positions, the United States formed a non-communist Republic of Korea south of the 38th parallel, while the Soviet Union formed a communist Democratic People's Republic of Korea north of the 38th parallel. The United States and the Soviet Union then withdrew their combat troops from the Korean peninsula, leaving behind two opposing governments and what always had been one country. Neither of these two governments accepted the legitimacy of the other. The stage was set for the Korean War. In April 1950, the Soviet Union gave North Korea permission and support to invade South Korea, overthrow its non-communist government, and reunite Korea under a communist government. North Korea invaded South Korea on June 25, 1950, without provocation or warning. South Korean forces along the 38th parallel were quickly overwhelmed by the attacking North Koreans. The South Korean capital of Seoul was captured on June 28, 1950, after only 3 days of fighting. These early South Korean losses triggered the Truman Doctrine. The United States promised to use military force if necessary to defend democracy from armed communist takeovers. On June 30, 1950, President Truman ordered the United States military to join the fight in Korea without congressional authorization or a declaration of war against North Korea. To explain why he did not seek a declaration of war from Congress, as required under the United States Constitution, Truman created the fiction that the Korean War was not really a war and instead was merely a police action. The first battle between the United States and North Korean troops took place July 5, 1950, when the U.S. combat unit, designated Task Force Smith, tried to stop the North Koreans from advancing further into South Korea. The North Koreans overran Task Force Smith, inflicting 40% casualties, forcing survivors to retreat. The United States obtained a United Nations Security Council resolution on July 7, 1950, that transformed the American military operation in South Korea into a UN military operation led and dominated by the United States. North Korean forces continued to attack successfully and took over almost all of South Korea during the month of July. By August 4, 1950, UN forces held their last line of defense, known as the Pusan Perimeter, in the southeastern corner of South Korea. UN forces had their backs to the South China Sea and no place left to retreat. General Walton Bulldog Walker told the troops defending the Pusan Perimeter, "Stand or die. A retreat into Pusan will result in the greatest massacre in history." How did the United States get into the predicament where its army in South Korea was on the verge of annihilation after only 1 month of war? What happened to the United States military that prevailed in World War II only 5 years earlier? The United States misjudged how large of a military it would need after World War II and downsized too much. The United States Army was reduced from a peak of more than 8 million troops during World War II to only 542,000 troops in 1948. The other U.S. military branches were similarly downsized, with widespread cuts in funding, equipment, and readiness. At the outbreak of the Korean War, much of the United States military was already deployed in Western Europe, confronting Soviet troops as part of the Cold War. Among the few United States troops available to send to Korea were troops serving on occupation duty in neighboring Japan. Many of these troops were inexperienced recruits, not combat ready, and lightly armed. These were the troops the North Koreans forced to retreat to the Pusan Perimeter. Fortunately, there was one American division based in the United States that was combat ready and available to send to Korea to reinforce the troops trapped at the Pusan Perimeter. This was the Marine 1st Division. The Marines quickly loaded into ships and were on their way. As the Marines approached South Korea, they were ordered to conduct a surprise amphibious combat assault at the port of Inchon, behind North Korean lines, instead of landing at the port of Pusan as expected. The successful Marine landing at Inchon in September 1950 completely changed the dynamics of the Korean War. From Inchon, UN troops quickly recaptured Seoul and cut supply lines supporting North Korean troops fighting on the Pusan Perimeter. North Korean troops then retreated back into North Korea. By October 1st, UN troops had accomplished all of their goals under the UN Security Council mandate of July 7th. North Korean troops were gone from South Korea. The South Korean government was back in its capital of Seoul. The South Korean people's right to choose their own government was secure. The United States then miscalculated and invaded North Korea to overthrow its communist government, even though this had nothing to do with the Truman Doctrine or the original purpose for sending American troops to Korea. The United States did so in spite of Communist China's warning that if a single American crossed the 38th parallel, China would enter the war. The United States dismissed the Chinese warning as a bluff. The United Nations invasion of North Korea was initially successful. By Thanksgiving 1950, some UN troops had reached the border between China and North Korea. While UN troops were invading North Korea, 300,000 Chinese troops entered North Korea to repel the invasion. Chinese troops avoided detection by traveling only at night and hiding during the day. Warnings of Chinese troop presence were ignored until the Chinese attacked with overwhelming numbers, forcing the UN forces to retreat back into South Korea and surrender the South Korean capital of Seoul for the second time in the war. The supreme UN military commander for the Korean War at this time was Douglas MacArthur. MacArthur recommended to President Truman that the United States now should drop 26 nuclear bombs on China, effectively risking a nuclear World War III. When Truman rejected MacArthur's advice, MacArthur became insubordinate and was relieved of command. Under the United States Constitution, the military is obligated to follow the orders of the President as its commander-in-chief. MacArthur was replaced by World War II hero Matthew Ridgway. Ridgway re-energized and redirected UN troops to successfully counterattack the Chinese without using nuclear weapons. UN troops recaptured Seoul and advanced back to the area along the 38th parallel. Instead of invading North Korea a second time, as had been done the prior year, President Truman now ordered Ridgway to simply hold the line along the 38th parallel, introducing the concept of limited warfare to the American people. The remainder of the war was a stalemate. Both the United States and the Soviet Union transitioned to new leadership the first half of 1953. Dwight Eisenhower replaced Truman as president in the United States with a campaign pledge to end the Korean War. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin died in March 1953 and was replaced by Nikita Khrushchev. These leadership transitions helped facilitate agreement to a ceasefire that took effect July 1953, bringing the major fighting of the Korean War to an end. The ceasefire that took place in July 1953 was not a peace treaty. It did nothing to resolve the underlying reason for the war, that the United States and the Soviet Union put two opposing governments in Korea during the Cold War. The conflict between these two opposing governments continues today. Almost 34,000 Americans lost their lives in the Korean War. Was it worth it? The difference in freedom, education, health, and overall quality of life between North and South Koreans today vindicates the United States' decision in June 1950 to defend South Korea from communist takeover. Since the end of the Korean War, 27 million North Koreans have lived in poverty, famine, little education, and few personal freedoms, while South Korea transformed into a high-income, advanced economy with a high quality of life. 52 million South Koreans live in freedom today because the United States defended South Korea during the Korean War.